One of the most common questions I receive is, I don't know what I want to do in life. I'm Drew, and helping others find their passion, that's my passion. It's also a pretty important question for all of us. So let's go ahead and dive in to finding your passion. First off, I want to debunk one of the biggest myths out there. Something a lot of people, they're kind of under that assumption that there's only one passion for us. And finding one's passion is like searching for the proverbial needle in a haystack. But that's not how it really works. The truth of the matter is that there's probably many things that could potentially be your passion. In fact, it's entirely possible to have more than one passion. If you take a look at a lot of very successful people, you'll find that's generally the case. There's more than one passion for each of them. Think about your own life. You spend the first 20 some odd years of your life hunting down that perfect spouse, a person that will do anything for you, that you'll do anything for. You have a passion for them that you think will never be topped. Then you have that first child and you have a new passion. You don't bail on that first passion of your spouse, but you have a second passion. And this is how it works across the board in all of our lives. There's only two things you need to do in order to really discover one of your passions. And the first is that you must change where you get your dopamine from. Dopamine is a chemical that's released by our brain that motivates us to do things. And without it, you will literally starve. Even if there's food right in front of you, if you don't have that dopamine release, you're not going to eat it. And that dopamine release, it's also accompanied by pleasure. But the problem nowadays is that dopamine, it's very easy to get. It's cheap, it's abundant. Everywhere. Back in the day, we had to do stuff in order to get that dopamine. And most of the time that meant creating something. You had to build a house, you planted a garden, you watched it grow. But today, instead of remodeling your own house, we get filled with dopamine watching TV shows of someone else fixing up a house. So nowadays, it's a little bit different. We can now flood our brain with dopamine without having to do much at all. You can surf the web. You binge watch some TV shows. You can order amazing food right to your front door almost instantaneously. And methods like this have become the main source of dopamine for the majority of people. Now, what's the difference about these sources of dopamine as compared to the ones we used to get that we mentioned before? Today, our dopamine fix is from consumption. And the ones we used to get were from actual creation. And this is a very important distinction in order for someone to discover their passion. It's gotta stem from creation. If you get the majority of your dopamine from a form of consumption, do you know what we call that? We call it addiction. You're addicted to watching TV. You're addicted to smoking cigarettes. You're addicted to eating junk food. But on the other hand, if we get the majority of our dopamine from a form of creation, that's called passion. You're passionate about drawing. You're passionate about dancing. You're passionate about farming. So the first and most important thing you have to do in order to find your passion is to turn back your consumption valve. You got to watch less TV, play less video games, eat less junk food. When you turn back that consumption valve, you force yourself to start looking for dopamine from forms of creation. And this is crucial for our next step. The second thing you have to do in order to find your passion is to simply expose yourself to a variety of different forms of creation. To give yourself a chance to get dopamine from these sources instead of forms of consumption. Now, there's no fancy trick to finding these things. You just got to approach it the old-fashioned way. You got to try things out. So what I suggest to you to do after successfully completing that step one is to get out there and expose yourself to as many areas as possible. So for example, here at Every Arkansan, We have 6 days a week where you have the volunteer opportunities to try things out. Your local church has opportunities to try things out. Try working on a wish list of your projects that you want to do. Your spouse's home improvement list. Maybe you do a few of those and you develop a passion for renovations. Develop a bucket list of things you want to try. You never know what passion will ignite. Maybe it's trying to see whether or not you can make this hobby into a passion. If you successfully followed that first step, which is to drastically tone down the amount of dopamine you get from consumption, what happens next should be automatic. Let's say you picked photography as something that you might be interested in. If you followed those first steps correctly, you'll naturally do some research on photography. You'll look up some videos. You'll start playing around with a cheap camera. Or if you don't have a camera, just use your phone. And after a while, you know whether or not you actually like this hobby. All of this is fueled by dopamine that you're no longer getting from forms of consumption because you're now getting out there and you're creating. And let's say you don't find yourself interested in photography at all. I mean, some things you just try, they don't work. You have to move on to the second thing on your list. And if that doesn't work, you move on to the third thing, and so on and so on. If you continue to find yourself not interested in anything, chances are you've really not turned down the valve on what you're getting from consumption. You got to turn that completely off to really find your passion. And that first step is critical for that second step for you to get to finding your passion. I know this sounds overly simplistic, but finding a passion isn't as hard as people make it seem. You just have to get up out of your chair. You have to stop dreaming about it, and you got to start doing something. Along the way, I promise you, God is going to multiply those steps, and you're going to wake up with a fresh wind and fresh fire for life, a new passion.